Hey guys, welcome to Do the Change podcast, where we're challenging and reimagining occupational and environmental health sciences. In this podcast, we focus on upcoming and current leaders in the field and dive into how they got to where they are today and their advice for those interested in the field. My name is Joanne Tay, and I'm a current undergraduate here at Berkeley, and our guest for this episode is Kevin Rue. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, everyone.
So I'll start by introducing him. Kevin is a MPH student in epidemiology/biostatistics, graduating in May this year. He is passionate about addressing chronic disease disparities in marginalized communities. Through data-driven insights, he hopes to contribute to the mitigation of occupational and environmental health exposures and promote safer workplaces for those most disproportionately affected. Born and raised in California, Kevin also received his BS in biology with a minor in society and genetics from UCLA. Awesome. How are you today, Kevin?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's a pleasure. How are you?
Good. Same with me. Um, I guess we can get started about like what you do, right? Because I just said that you do epidemiology and biostatistics, but many people don't know what those words actually mean, me included, actually.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm studying epidemiology and biostatistics, as Joanne described. And essentially, epidemiology, really the goal is kind of to understand disease patterns and trends, understand exposures, what might lead to certain diseases, how we can essentially we're really interested in oftentimes a lot of the systemic causes of certain diseases and conditions and how we can prevent those and mitigate those. And for me, particularly, my interests are really in chronic disease disparities for like marginalized populations where we see a worse health outcome. So that's where epi comes in with a lot of these different study designs and techniques in essentially exploring that and actually evaluating that and collecting data and understanding the extent to which why these populations might be more at risk for certain conditions and diseases compared to others.
Mm-hmm. What does like a usual day in your life look like when you're like doing this? Are you just going to classes? What type of research do you do?
Yeah, no, I think a day in the life, it really ranges. It really depends on the day. Some days I might have classes that I'll start out the day with. Other times I might be just going off into work first, things like that. And for me, work looks like a variety of different ways besides working at the Center for Occupational Environmental Health as well. I'm also pretty involved in working. I work with some faculty and some research surrounding occupational health in particular. Yeah, so my capstone project has been both working on this California janitor workload study. Specifically, I'm interested in and have been assessing the impacts of unionization on the relationships between physical workload and adverse health outcomes in these group of janitors that have been studied in this larger cohort. And I think it's really great to be a part of that since it's pretty relevant right now in terms of how big the labor movement has been recently, especially in this past year. There's been a lot of union activity, and there's been a great big resurgence and interest in unionization and the labor movement overall. That's been really interesting being able to work on that, assess those associations, and even be able to present that at some conferences. These past month, I was able to go to Utah, the annual NORA conference at the Rocky Mountains, hosted by the Rocky Mountain Center for Occupational Environmental Health, which was really great just being able to present that work and also be going to the annual SCR meeting, the Society for Epidemiologic Research in Austin in June to also present on that. So it's been great being a part of that. So long story short, I think that every day is a bit different um, for my week, and I think it keeps things exciting and engaging.
That's cool. Working with janitors in labor unions, that's awesome. But like, how does that tie into epidemiology? Like my idea of epidemiology is like disease. So like, how does the labor unions part of that get tied into that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with understanding diseases or just oftentimes we're often interested in just understanding for janitors in particular, for example, like there's a lot of concerns with chronic pain, specifically musculoskeletal disorders and these long-term chronic health outcomes, adverse health outcomes, mental health in particular is an area of increasing concern, especially with the greater strain on janitors from during the pandemic, we found that oftentimes that could be traced potentially to workload. And that's what we kind of started out with the study was assessing the impact of workload on these different associations. And in terms of union status, we were in particular curious about whether union status was an effect modifier in this relationship. And what effect modifier is essentially this kind of third variable where our exposure and our outcome is going to vary essentially, like the relationship is going to be different potentially between these two groups. So essentially we were interested to see if union janitors versus non-union janitors, what were those differences in associations? Would we see more perhaps adverse health outcomes in non-union janitors compared to union janitors? So that was kind of the start of that question and kind of assessing, working from first, like understanding just those initial exposures of physical workload, like how hard are these janitors, how frequently are their tasks, their kind of their general daily workload, and understanding the variety of health outcomes that were potentially associated with that. And then kind of that's where afterwards we kind of brought union status into that as well.
Well, that's cool. So it's like really, really interdisciplinary.
Yeah, definitely. I think you really bring in a lot of different aspects. This study in particular was, of course, through the Dr. Chris Harris's study, and very much focused on ergonomics, with kind of at the forefront of it, in the sense that, especially in janitors in particular, they face a lot of biomechanical workload stressors, particularly like the how hard they're exerting, oftentimes with these repetitive, constant motions that they're doing on their day-to-day tasks can again lead to these variety of these chronic health outcomes. So it's been interesting applying more of my more of my technical epi background and more of the study design and statistical side of things into a field, especially a field such as ergo, where I feel like it's continually advancing and really starting to potentially make a big difference for workers in the field.
That's cool. Do you ever find that you're involved with like the more like social justice aspect of it, or like the labor unions and like fighting for workers' rights? Are you ever involved with that?
I've mostly been on kind of the back end of things of kind of just
Mm,
assessing and understanding the potential implications of unionization and things like that. But I think you bring up a great point, and it's definitely something that's increasingly important in terms of making sure that workers actually understand their rights and know what is available to them and the resources available to them. And that's oftentimes why we've seen in some of the literature why union workers often have this kind of protective benefit, because they have more support, more resources, and more information available to them, and have greater protections and worker safety as a result often of unionization and those collective bargaining contracts.
I see. So it's all kind of intertwined. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. How did you even get involved with this work with janitors? Is that kind of like your end goal, like working with janitors continually?
Good question. I think for me, I was for when we were searching for a capstone, I was kind of just looking around. I've always been interested broadly in occupational environmental exposures, but didn't necessarily have a specific data set in mind or a study group that I knew I was going to get involved with and was able to work with. And the opportunity kind of came up to work on this, specifically looking at unionization. It was a perfect opportunity kind of for me to jump into that space and work into that. I wouldn't say that janitors aren't studying, like the janitors aren't necessarily my end goal by any means, but I would say I think it aligns a lot with my interests, especially in working with more marginalized populations, I feel like, of workers. I think a lot of my interests are working with much of the more vulnerable workers, where I feel, again, like oftentimes there's just less protections in place for them. And I think it's important to have more studies conducted to shed more light and make sure that there's increasing regulation and support for these workers.
Wow, that's awesome. I guess to like backtrack a little bit even more, how did you decide that you liked working with occupational health? Like, what fueled the interest in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, my inspiration was really pretty personal, in the sense it was just witnessing. My mom works at a nail salon, and having witnessed over just watching her come home over the years, like growing up and seeing kind of the toll of just her occupation that really had on her over the years, just seeing, like, even just witnessing her hands, like the cracked skin from like just working with all these chemicals all constantly, the fatigue from the work, being in these again very kind of similar to janitors actually, and often these very repetitive motions. Except for her, she's often very stationary for most of the day as well. And just seeing kind of the damage that just the occupation itself had taken on her over the years was pretty impactful. And I always had an interest in occupational. And that's really what stemmed my interest in occupational environmental health exposures in particular. And then when I came here and had the opportunity to work at the COEH, I feel like being directly exposed to and just really the more broader field and world of uh, occupational environmental health and just seeing how interdisciplinary and how everything was very intertwined was really inspiring for me and why I've been very got
Mm-hmm.
drawn in and haven't left since.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's really cool. I bet your mom is happy about that. Like it comes from such a place close to the heart. I've also seen
Yeah.
some stuff online, like working with gel nail polish can give you like an allergy over time. Scary stuff.
Yeah, I have heard about that too. People developing allergies later. There's just, I feel like there's so many potential hazards often in a lot of these different occupations that just come up. It's pretty sad.
So like when you mentioned working with marginalized populations, you just mean like workers who are like vulnerable workers, you said? Could you define that a little bit more?
Yeah, I would say that's also a thing. There's been a lot of definitions of vulnerable workers. I feel like especially the word like precarious comes up a lot. There's not necessarily a specific definition of precarious work or precarity of work, like just a general consensus. A lot of the definitions often surround the idea of just workers. Often it's a low wage work, potentially with little job security, little worker protection, overwhelming worker demands, like just um, larger workload burden, things like that can often be associated with, I'd say, precarious work. Of course, just dangerous work in general, I feel like also definitely falls into that scope as well, is how I would potentially define that.
Yeah, I think that's useful for people who like I also have an interest in helping these type of populations, but didn't previously know what the term for it is or like what the field of study around it looks like currently. So yeah, that's really interesting. I guess I have another question that backtracks a little bit more in your life. I maybe we should have started from like the start of your life towards now, but now I want to ask you. So like in your bio, I read that you did a BS in biology at UCLA.
Yeah.
Were you always interested in human biology? How did your like path look?
Well, for me, I was initially pre-med actually for quite some time. So the classic bio major to line up with that perfectly. I mean, for me, biology was always interesting. I did enjoy just in general the STEM and was always very interesting to me. And I did enjoy learning about the life sciences a lot. But it wasn't until my senior year where I did my major, or towards the end of my undergrad when I did my minor in society and genetics, and I was really exposed to more of that interdisciplinary nature between like the life sciences, scientific field, health, and just really understanding the social determinants of health in particular. That was when I was really exposed to the concept and the idea of social determinants of health and all these different factors that are at an interplay in defining and dictating someone's health and overall health and well-being. And that got me more interested in public health. I was started taking some public health courses during my undergrad, and then during my gap year, I graduated during COVID, and during my gap year I worked in COVID testing and surveillance, which really was at the time before like just being out there in the field where for public very much in the midst of public health and kind of really enjoying that work type of work and wanting to get more involved in it. That's kind of what led me to apply for my MPH here at Berkeley and where has led me to where I am now.
I feel like you're the second person so far in this podcast who has pre-med turned occupational environmental health. I feel like it's kind of a tough decision to make because you invest so much into being pre-med in your undergrad years. Like what were your large determining factors?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely tough because and at the heart of it all, I really enjoy just working with people and being able to just directly engage and interact with individuals. And I think being a doctor or just being a medical professional, you're really just right there. You're always seeing patients, interacting with patients face to face, things like that. But I think as I was just being exposed to a lot more different perspectives and getting a lot more knowledge towards the later end of my undergrad and during my gap year, I think I really became a lot more interested in just understanding the systemic, like the root causes of a lot of these different health outcomes, like rather than coming from a, st a standpoint of kind of trying to cure and like kind of patch up all these different conditions and outcomes. I really became a lot more interested in more of a preventative approach. I feel like oftentimes in just in a lot of different fields and situations in general, I feel like we often take a response approach where if something bad happens, something occurs, then we kind of have this legislation, then we kind of place these protections in place, etc. So I was really interested in finding ways to just establish these preventative measures in the first place and kind of being able to contribute to that. And I think through public health, and especially within my discipline, I think that's really the one of the big aspects that we're doing is kind of understand what are these specific exposures, what is exactly leading to a lot of these health outcomes that might be affecting some groups more disproportionately than others and things like that. It was tough, I'd say, but I really enjoy what I doing now, and I really fell in love with research as a whole, I'd say.
Awesome. Wow. That's like a really good perspective into administering healthcare for the population. Do you think the fact that it was like you were graduating during COVID, do you think the fact that COVID was going on in the world at that time played a role in your decision? I mean, yeah, like you had the experience with the COVID work.
Yeah, I'd say so definitely. I'm sure for a lot of people, COVID definitely really changed a lot of people's perspective, and I feel like exposed a lot of us to a lot of different things that we maybe just didn't really consider before. I think, especially during my gap year working, like in that kind of space and engaging with a lot of individuals and often being the ones educating them just on like, oh, these are the testing guidelines, these are the quarantine guidelines, etc. Just like simple stuff such as that. I feel like you really start to understand how impactful, I think, just education, like public health education from a standpoint, just informing the public is really public health is at the center of it. We're trying to protect and promote the population's health and well-being, right? And I think COVID really showed me the pandemic really showed me kind of the extent to that in which and how important and much needed that is throughout the country in the world.
Is that kind of how you landed on epidemiology, biostatistics?
Yeah, yeah, I think I would say so.
That's awesome. Do you have any like kind of ambitions, maybe end goals in your research that you like can think of now?
In my research, I wouldn't say I have any end goal in particular that I can think of at the moment, but I will say that I am very much committed or intending to kind of continue on my research journey and educational journey as well, since I am planning on applying to PhD programs in the fall in epidemiology. So I'm hoping to really continue to do the work that I'm doing and hopefully whether that's applying that and staying within academia or into federal or state government. I think that's really where I see myself, at least as in the end goal.
hmm you mentioned that you could work like what does jobs in working I'm sorry, hang on, let me rephrase. You mentioned working in the federal or state governments versus like academia. What do jobs look like for your field, those types of jobs?
I'd say it's very broad. There are definitely a lot of different options. A lot of individuals with epidemiology degrees, they could often go into just straight data analytics. Some might be very more interested in the statistics side of things. They might become biostatisticians, whether for it's the state, government, etc., or for consulting companies or for healthcare organizations such as Kaiser, etc. Often a lot of more on the data side of things. There's research analysts. Similarly, there might be helping with conducting the study design, carrying out studies, analyzing data. Health scientists, very similar roles as well, I'd say. There's also, of course, just epidemiologist roles in general, where you're often like there's a lot of different departments in different fields, like especially if you're looking at the city or just the state or county levels addressing a lot of different things from with different focuses from mental health to environmental lead exposures to just really across the field, a lot of different range of possibilities, I'd say, in terms of different occupations. And there are individuals that, of course, use it, continue on to, they do still are interested in medicine and still, but they want that more of that public health background part of their to include in their training and kind of enrich their training as well and keep that perspective as they go into and become a physician or a medical professional. So there are individuals that also go on to medical school as well. I'd say there's a lot of different options within the field.
What's your personal outcome that you'd like? What's your personal preference?
My personal preference, I'd say I'd either want to work. I think ideally I see myself either one day becoming a professor, maybe staying, if I did choose to stay in academia, because I do really enjoy teaching and just working with students in addition to research, or just working within the state, specifically whether that's for NIOSH or like the Department of Industrial Relations, the DIR, just focus on kind of these occupational environmental exposures within and just
That's
promoting
awesome.
individuals' health. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Have you had experience teaching OEHS before?
Not OEHS directly, I would say. I have had some experience teaching as a tutor through the Dream Office. I'm currently today I actually just gave my final review session for the Epidemiology Methods 2 course. So just kind of being able to teach students is something I really enjoy, and this was kind of a really great opportunity to kind of put that to practice.
Does that mean you're like a GSI?
No, so it's a bit different from it's similar. It's but a tutor, it's separate from it, like a TA or a GSI.
Cool. Wow. That's awesome. I feel like a key part about this field that I talk about with many of the previous podcast guests is like science communication, right? And so far a lot of them talk about science communication to the people, the populations of workers that they're specifically working with. But I think this is interesting because now you're talking about science communication to teach like the next generation.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good point because I think at the end of the day, communication really is key in how and understanding and being able to adapt and be able to actively and accurately portray your information effectively. There's the word, effectively portray the information to different audiences is really key, I think, I'd say, in just this field and any field really, especially as a field as interdisciplinary as this, and where you have so many different stakeholders, so many different people from different backgrounds. So like you were saying at the beginning, like individuals might not even understand what specific terms might mean, and or it's just general aspects of public health. So starting there and understanding where your audience, I think, is really key. But yeah, I think it is exciting training. I mean, I consider myself, I'm only either first year students, so I'm only really 1 year like older than them, if you can call it that. But I think it's great seeing kind of we're all in the same boat and everyone's just so passionate about being and stepping into this really important field of just going on to become the next leaders in public health and beyond.
I heard similar things from previous guests that like they feel like those who are involved in OEHS are really passionate about it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I feel that I've met a lot of individuals. I mean, they've been doing this for many, many years now, and this is they poured their life's work into this, and it's definitely really passionate, especially when we're thinking about how many people are potentially affected, and like especially we're just looking across different occupations, understanding because these are individuals that are working in these fields or whatever occupation that might be, they're facing these exposures and hazards on a daily basis. This is their job. They're going for their to support their livelihood, their families, etc. And they're consistently being exposed potentially to for dangerous hazards, dangerous chemicals, etc. But they really have no choice at the end of the day. And that's where it's really important for a lot of these professionals across all these different fields. You have the doctors, you have the exposure measurements assessors, you have the people conducting the studies, people running. There's so many people that come together to, or just for really anything, there's just so many people that are coming together to kind of keep the machine going and kind of really evaluate these different um, exposures that make it. I feel like that's why it's so easy for individuals to become so passionate about it, of course.
I love to see it. I've met so many people and I've talked to so many people in the field who just like can just keep going on and on about their topic. And that's just really wholesome, I think. Hey guys, this is Joanne Tay, your host for this episode, and we have reached the end of part 1 of this conversation with our wonderful guest. Don't click out yet because part 2 of this conversation has already been posted, so check out our page to finish the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify and Instagram at Do the Change Podcast.